Well, for more on the suspension of subsidy removal, we're joined by Arise News analyst Dr. Sam Amadi, and later on we'll have a financial expert and infrastructure economist Dr. Nnachi. Dr. Sam, thanks for joining us. Let's begin with this suspension, or this announcement of suspension of subsidy removal. Of course, this was expected. I'm not even going to ask you that because this is not the first time we've heard this. President Buhari, when he was coming into office, they practically rode on, we're going to remove subsidy. In 2020, it came up again. Now, what I want to ask is, just recently, we heard the announcement the federal government took a loan from the World Bank in the guise of sort of cushioning the effect of the removal of subsidy. What's going to happen to that loan now? And this, before you go on, and this issue, before this announcement, removal of subsidy is a delicate issue. It's definitely been discussed before this. So why is the communication seems a bit confusing, like they don't know what they're doing?
Sure, I mean, it's obvious they're going to kick the ball down the road. And interestingly, maybe rightly so now. I mean, they had the chance to end it maybe in the previous quarter, and have maybe a quarter to prepare for the new government to come in. So it might look unkind to remove subsidy or prescribe removal June, just as the government is entering on the 29th. And so it's really going to happen. But again, back to the issue, this government administration rode to power saying, keep the subsidy doesn't exist, and of course fought the previous government in trying to remove the subsidy. And since 8 years, they did nothing to mainstream and clarify the fiscal position of the country, deal with some of the policy changes that will strengthen, create buffer for the poor and the vulnerable, and maybe move on more assuredly towards removing subsidy and creating repricing of the sector. And so now, the World Bank loan, which is a facility that has process and has been agreed upon, drawdown so what is going to happen now is that, look, you have to draw down the initial $800 million US to deal with about 10 million or so million per household, about 40 or so million per household. So you're going to try to maybe push it back a little bit, okay? So the drawdown is in the event of cushioning the impact of the subsidy. Now that the subsidy is now a little bit, the takeoff time is uncertain, then there's no point crystallizing that agreement. And again, it creates a question, what would the next government do? So they're going to probably study, they're going to probably take some time to, not just to weigh the cost-benefit analysis. Okay, we know that, look, the subsidy has been a major crisis, both in terms of physical lack of sustainability, in terms of revenue for government to finance important investment in social and economic well-being. But again, that's a critical thing. You look at what should be done in terms of reform of government to ensure that the subsidy itself and the gains that will come from both the opportunity costs in terms of savings and also in terms of this facility works for the people.
Let me jump in, yes, Dr. Sam Amadi. And it's almost looking like deja vu, something we've seen before, because this conversation looks, very familiar to many Nigerians. And keep in mind, there was Shopee, because you spoke about the gain. So once upon a time during the administration of President Jonathan, we had Shopee manned by the very respected Nigerian Dr. Christopher Kolade. And also we also saw what the labor union did, with some of those providing buses. But looking at this, it looks as if there's no clear-cut understanding as to what subsidy is about, because we're going down that journey again. When President Buhari came on, he did say, well, there was no subsidy. And the man whose party was part of that big protest, the very popular Ojota rally, is today the president-elect. So what are the, understanding that perhaps you think that the government is sensing now that is backtracking just in the dying days of this administration?
First, it's difficult to put through the removal politically. The political economy of it is difficult. You're going to deal with workers. We've seen change of government, the NLC, and a stronger leadership that's more committed to taking action. Second is that, look, you also think about the political headwinds. Are you going to remove a subsidy at a time when you have this level of uncertainty, a new government is coming in power, that government has some problem with in terms of how it's going to, how it's being received. Legitimacy issues are still to be sorted out, court going on. And the third issue really is that I think somehow government might also be thinking around what should we do to ensure that even the gains of this subsidy removal can really impact not just on mitigating the vulnerabilities that people suffer, but also helping to show up a much more robust, macroeconomy in the sense that, for example, we had Shopee invest in, talk about infant mortality, mortality health, investment in transportation, helping with workers. But the impact assessment does not show that those helped. Of course, we have some story from places like Indonesia, where subsidy was removed and cash transfer took place, but had some success rate. For Nigeria, the problem is how do you ensure not just that you minimize the impact of this subsidy in terms of inflation, especially energy inflation, transport inflation, that has knock-on effect on general inflation. That's one aspect of managing the macroeconomy of it. But again, you have to also think in terms of welfare loss. Consider the level of multidimensional poverty, consider the weakness, the low minimum wage, the take-home of workers get dwindled by day because of inflation or other factors. So if you bring in expected increase in transport costs that workers were going to experience. So the economists with government be thinking around how have we put in place the necessary mitigation? How we build the buffers that will make us optimize the physical advantage we gain by withdrawing subsidy, as well as ensure that these removals do not undermine what's already a weak socioeconomic well-being of the people. Look, the Nigerian, both poverty rate, deprivation rate, if you look at human development indicators, we are doing very badly. And of course, we're getting more, about 10 to 12 million people got into poverty in 2022 alone, according to the World Bank estimation. So you can imagine the level of immiseration of the working class. And then I think government will be thinking, have we really put in place all that we need to put in place? And again, even the removal strategy, oftentimes people think it's going to be one fell swoop. What are the processes for ensuring that we remove and get to market parity, to repricing, without too much undermining socioeconomic well-being, which is also important in driving up productivity and ensuring a more stable society.
All right, Dr. Sam, just sorry to cut you in. We have our second guest for tonight. He's joining us now from our outside studio, financial expert and infrastructure economist, Dr. Nnachi. Thanks for joining us tonight. We've just been discussing the effect of the removal of subsidy or suspension of subsidy. I don't know if you've been listening to us. We'd just like you to weigh in on the reasons we think, the reasoning behind the government's reneging on this removal of subsidy. What are your thoughts?
Thank you for having me on your studio. My first thought about it is when I held the NEC pronouncement, I first wondered what are the fundamentals behind it. And going through the media analysis that they made available, they could not even give a concrete reason. They could not state the facts why they are taking such stand, but they just made their recommendations and passed it. And this was the last sessions of NEC for this administration, so it becomes so concerned. But there are a few things you need to take into consideration and then probably to guide us properly. One, the 2023 budget, which is currently running with all the supplementary that has been approved, did not make provision for subsidy payment beyond end of June. And for that budget alone, we have over 3 trillion budget provision for the payment of this subsidy. So taking it beyond that June and taking it to maybe December or further means there's additional deficit of over 3 trillion. And we're already running a budget which is over 10 trillion in deficit, and then that means we're approaching 14 to 15 trillion deficit. And then you ask yourself, where are we going to get this money from? another borrowing either from any development institutions or from Ways and Means, which as of today, we are approaching 30 trillion in Ways and Means and over 40 trillions in other debts that's been accrued. So that gives us a very big concern to think about. And another area that we really need to pay attention, the Petroleum Industry Act. I don't know whether we've forgotten that we have a law that is in existence. That act made provisions for full deregulations of the entire sector. And it gave a time frame. And if you read through the act properly, you will realize that the time frame was 18 months. And if you calculate from when this act became effective by implementation, 30th of June is that 18 months. So what have we been doing from when this act were put in place and passed and it became a law? And we have this law binding on the government. Are we saying that over 18 months, nothing has been done to actually provide cushions for this? And if the answer is no, then we'll begin to ask ourselves the kind of country we have and the kind of government we run. But looking at what subsidy is all about, I've always asked this question: what are we subsidizing? Are you subsidizing the life of the rich, or you're subsidizing the life of the poor? Globally, you can subsidize transportation. You don't just generally subsidize PMS. I'm not the one that said I should go and buy 4 FT cars that consume 100 liters and 200 liters of. But the poor man in the street that wants to make use of public transport you can subsidize that, but not focusing that you want to really subsidize PMS. Some of us has 4 big cars, and it takes you 25,000 and 30,000 before you can fill the tank. And the regulation of the downstream is a must. We cannot live with it. Today, I can drive into the filling station, it's in Abuja here, and gradually they'll fill my tank and I'll buy at 180, 190. But I promise you, when I travel to the east, precisely my village, I'm from Ebonyi State, you buy that same PMS at 285, sometimes 300 and even above. So that there is already fully deregulated. Why are we lying to ourselves?
Dr. Nnachi, let me come in here. We're actually coasting home. Apologies that we lost some time, coming to you. But let me bring this to Dr. Amadi. And listening to Nnachi, he's brought in a different perspective and is talking about some issues about our statutes. There is an act, the Petroleum Industry Act, which ultimately tells us that by June 30, everything about subsidy should be off. Makes sense of what this may mean for a government that should come in the next few days. Dr. Amadi.
Well, I think he says the act we lie to ourselves. Yeah, that's the problem of writing acts in a way that probably shouldn't. The idea of deregulating the sector is one that the act proclaims clearly. But the timelines, we've seen several acts where we have missed the timeline. The timeline, in fact, not just the pricing, several of the things that ought to be done. For example, the High Court just gave a judgment validating government appointment of a chairman of the NNPC Limited, which are one of the things that should have been done as a corporation, as a company, no longer as a parastatal or corporation. So the point here is, look, we've already missed the timelines. But again, the bigger question he raised around inefficiency. Everybody knows that the petroleum subsidy is inefficient in the classical economic sense, the source of the pricing. But the question is, if you touch it, the trigger of actions, for example, is correct. PPMS is probably benefiting the rich, not less than the poor. The subsidy on it. But again, when transport is hiked, the poor would suffer. So the question I think he put is, how will government now deal with the inevitable outcome of this, both the economics of it, both the social, political aspect of it. And what we are seeing, why government has not done anything, is clearly that it is overwhelmed by the politics of it, and therefore can't take actions on the economics of it. Yes, we should not subsidize what the rich actually has over 40% access to in terms of data. But again, the question is, when you remove the subsidy and there's a disproportionate increase in transport fare, for workers who are earning less than, some of them less than 30,000, how will you manage both the loss of welfare, both the lack of productivity, and both the socioeconomic crisis that this can unleash? So clearly, we've missed the timeline. We're not paying attention to those things we set out to do. We don't have both the political will. We'll probably don't think around it properly, and then wait till the last minute. So the government kicks the bucket, kicks the can down the road, and the new government would not really pick it up easily. It has to do reanalysis and win a lot of credit and political capital before it deals with this heavy headwind.
And that's where I love to bring Nnachi again quickly here, because we recall the New Year crisis, popularly called the Ojota crisis. Now we're having a new government coming in place. And Dr. Amadi has spoken about averting a socio-economic crisis for the new government. Is there a recipe?
Definitely, Suleiman. There's no time you will remove subsidy and there will not be reactions. Let's not believe that there will not be reactions. But what is important is the measure you put in place. There are 2 or 3 options that you can look at. Clearly, I talked about subsidizing transportation. Today, you can tell that globally, the rate at which the electric cars are moving into the world, if we take the funds we have, the resources that is available for this, take a typical example. You take 3 trillion and you say you want to inject this fund into transportation. What the masses will cry is that removing it and not doing anything. And it will not take next 30 days or next 60 days for me to assemble 10 transport cars in every local government to convey people. Either he's operating on electric or he's operating on the CNG. It will not take more than that 60 days. It's all about the political will. So the government should be willing and ready to make provisions for alternative means of transportation. And this does not require any extra energy to do it. Within 30, 60 days, it can be done. And let's bring this to even the natural resources we have. When we talk about the electric cars that exist, most electric cars are dependent on one of the abundant minerals we have in Nigeria, lithium minerals, which is used to manufacture the battery storage system. We have over 27 commercially defined available lithium sites in Nigeria. What are we doing with that? Such situation create innovations. Such situation give us the challenge for us to know the solutions for what to do. So probably in my own solution to the federal government and to the incoming government is, please bear the brunt on that 30th of June, end the subsidy. Design a program for the implementation, and we'll gradually go around it and we'll come to reality. Like I mentioned earlier on, I said over 60% is consumed by big men that owns these big cars. They are the ones gulping these things. We are subsidizing their lifestyles. We should end it. Anybody that wants to have that lifestyle should. Because if we decide today to produce electric cars state by state for interstate transportation and intrastate transportation, one, even if you supply 1,000 cars or you supply 5,000 cars, you have automatically created 10,000 jobs for the driver and the conductors. And this livelihood will elevate the poverty out of it. And government take responsibility. And what government can do, major transport organizations in Nigeria should be captured into transport database, and so that you will be able to subsidize that transportation. If I go to God is Good and buy a ticket, and I'm subsidizing that, automatically from God is Good, government can pay for that subsidy for that transport. If I go to Edegbe Motors, if I go to Kenneth Richuku, you can have a database of the passengers that uses this major transport, and you begin to expand it. Anybody that wants to run transport company will now be mandated to come into that database, and they will now be mandated to pay tax. The tax base will increase and the economy will roll. It is just about thinking out of the box. And as economists, I look at it as very easy. It can be captured, it can be done, and it's not impossible for us to do that.
I really wish we can actually stretch this. I look for a better time to have you both again, Dr. Sam Amadi, Dr. Nnachi. Many thanks for your insights here on Newsnight.